Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Sustainable Connections podcast. I'm Mark Lee. I'm the Global Director of Thought Leadership at ERM. If you've listened before, you've heard me hosting. We're recording this on the Monday after Climate Week New York City for 2024. And instead of bringing in some external guests, I'm going to have a conversation just with three of my fellow ERMers and delve into what we saw, experienced, and felt last week in New York. So really happy to have with me three folks, all based in North America, as it turns out. First off is Oliver Forster, who is an ERM partner, and he is a leader in our climate markets business. And Ollie is based in Toronto. Ollie, hello.
Hello, Mark. Pleased to be here.
Great to have you here. Second, Alexandra Guaqueta, also called Alex. You'll hear me doing that. Alex is an ERM partner, and she's the global leader of our social impact and human rights practice, or what we call a Voyager. Alex is based in Washington, D.C. Alex, welcome.
Happy to be with you and colleagues, Mark.
Awesome. And finally, Matt Haddon, who's actually been a speaker on the podcast before, hosting with me. And Matt is our global leader of biodiversity, water, and nature. And despite what you will hear in his accent, he is based in Houston. Matt, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Mark. Great to hear you. It occurs to me, by the way, Mark, that we've got four of us here who, whilst we may have citizenship in the US, none of us were actually born here. So that's kind of an interesting perspective of internationalism here.
Yeah, we've got a funny crossover, and people will hear that in our voices and maybe in our perspectives too, as we blend some thoughts and views on an event that took place in the US, but was so very global in nature. So I'm excited to get into each of your areas of specialization. And again, we'll go back to carbon markets and social impact and nature. But first, I want to get some overall impressions of the week, hectic as it was and diverse as it was. And we were all in different channels there. You know, we overlapped a tiny bit among the four of us at those 80 plus event that ERM folks were at, but not that much. So I think we'll all have a different view of the week. And Matt, I want to get you to kick us off on this. What was your sense of what was going on?
Last year felt very naturey. It was like there was a nature takeover of Climate Week. This year felt much more climatey again. As a bit of me wondered whether that was because the world's not going to the next climate COP, or a lot of people aren't going to the next climate COP, and therefore New York Climate Week became almost the de facto 2024 meeting of the minds around climate. But it felt more climate oriented than it did nature compared to previous years. Not that the nature and water piece wasn't in there. The second thing that hit me, I was really reflecting on a little speech that Johan Rockström gave, who, for those who know, was kind of the godfather, godparent of the planetary boundaries thinking from the Stockholm Institute. And he made a point which I thought was incredibly powerful. And he said, nature isn't just a set of resources that we take or use in some way. It's also the buffer for everything else.
So our shield, whether it's a great way to use it or not, rings really true. And Matt, if you could go a tiny bit farther on the Rockström piece, I think sometimes I've heard him myself and talking to others who've listened to him. I wasn't there this year for the session that he delivered, but read some of the follow-up. I know people can get overwhelmed. It's rooted in the science. It's like here is the truth. This is where we are. But sometimes it hits so hard on the doom or gloom side of things that people can walk away almost disempowered. How did you read it this year? And did it help maybe to hear things like nature is the buffer? We can use this if we get it right.
I'm not sure, to be honest, Mark. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that lovely graphic that the Stockholm Institute uses is quite compelling visually, but it does make things look very bleak. I'm not sure. I didn't speak to a lot of people afterwards who said that was motivating. Now I understand that we're even further up the creek. I'm going to do something. So I don't know. I've long been fascinated by the use of language around climate change. I almost did a PhD in it 30 years ago, and I think people are still not switched on by the negative. Yeah. And I think that's why the renewables thing has emerged as a powerful force, because you can do something about it.
And that's something about all three of your roles. I think that climate is literally diffuse. Greenhouse gases from anywhere contribute to a global problem, and it surrounds all of us, but it, I think, can feel difficult for individuals to wrestle with it, whereas nature impacts are often more local. Alex, your work on social performance, social impact, and human rights, brings it literally to the person. And Ollie, I think your work on carbon markets gives us a response, a specific action we can take. So maybe that's part of how to absorb the Rockstrom-like messages overall, is to immediately think, and what do we do now where I am? Before I muse more philosophical ramblings, Alex, how about your overall view of last week in New York?
Yeah, well, look, I have a bit of a different take to Matt, and maybe it's my own background and bias as international relations expert. But we forget that Climate Week really happens on the back of the UN General Assembly, which, by the way, also has an important summit, which has focused on the Sustainable Development Goals in the past. And so this time around, it was a very important conversation happening around a pact for the future. That was a series of commitments that governments decided to make, and they don't make them on their own. It happens after consultation with companies and with civil society. And it takes quite some time to come to these agreements. So this pact covered the SDGs, renewed commitment around the Sustainable Development Goals. It covered poverty. It covered empowering women. It covered food insecurity and the need to address that. And of course, climate. So this is also happening at this time. So for me, actually, when I was coming home, like Matt, and I was sitting on the train on my way home, I was thinking, wow, this is really the largest comprehensive sustainability summit in the world. It's not just climate, because we did address nature, we did address poverty, living wages, many other topics. And it's the place where governments, companies, and civil society come together to agree, disagree, discuss, find solution, move things forward. I don't think there's any other event of this magnitude. Mark, you said 600 events. I was trying to look how many there were, but then multiply that by some more, right? So to me, this was just fascinating that sustainability has become such a huge mainstream theme for the planet, for everyone. So that really struck me.
Yeah,
that's how I saw the week.
Yeah, no, and I'm really glad for the way you brought the governmental in, because there was the UN General Assembly running for many, many years before Climate Week was added on. And sometimes now it feels like Climate Week has taken over and become the predominant part of the week. And that's partly, of course, about access. Not just everybody can show up at the UN and participate in the General Assembly, but the way in which it is mushroomed and the diversity of what comes in, and even the fact that there is no center of gravity, that we know how many people went to COP in Dubai for COP28 because you have to register to go to the blue zone or the green zone. So we can say with some confidence 100,000 people showed up there last year. We know tens of thousands, probably more than 100,000 people participated in New York last week, but they made their own choices at this incredibly diverse set of events that, as you said, Alex, cover the entire sustainability subject matter, not just climate. And maybe they'll give it a spin to how does this other issue connect to the climate agenda, which is, of course, exactly what we should be doing. Ollie, your overarching view, what did you experience last week?
I think that this year it felt busier and more, widespread than ever. I was looking back at my notes and I thought this was a really pithy summary of the challenge from Amazon's head of science called Jamie Mulligan. And he said that we've just got to do three things. We've got to decarbonize corporate supply chains, we got to protect nature, and we got to scale removals. And I thought that was such a good kind of macro overview of everything that's happening in New York. At the end of the day, we've just got to do those three things. And I did think you felt at New York, the kind of motto was "It's time," and you felt that people are moving from all of the target setting. Lots of corporates have now set their net zero targets, and they're kind of like, okay, it's time now. Now we got to do something. And I felt that in New York. I think for the last few years, the voluntary carbon market in particular has been grappling with the quality challenge. And the main challenge for the market as a whole is what's good enough? Like, how do you set benchmarks that everyone recognizes and is happy that, okay, a project's never going to be 100% perfect in every regard, but what is a threshold that we can all get behind and supports that scaling of the market? So that I would say is still the kind of overall theme, is that what's good enough? You hear that from the corporates that you speak with, you hear that from the suppliers that you speak to. So looking at the different parts of the market, I think that you have some reactive kind of aspects of what's going on and some proactive aspects of what's going on. I think when you look at the demand side, one factor that's really clear is that there's been all this criticism, and one response to that is to try and get closer to the project. Whereas previously, corporates would look at projects through retailers often. Now they're trying to go straight to the project supplier, and that decreases your risk. It often means that you can have more of an influence of the impacts that the project has as it develops. You can make sure that what you're really concerned about is baked into how the project is run. And I think that's still a really prevalent theme on the demand side of the voluntary carbon market.
And Ollie, if I can, I don't think we can assume that everybody listening knows what a carbon markets project looks like. So can you give us a few examples of what that is that people are trying to get closer to verify? And I know there's a huge diversity, but just give us a couple examples of what a carbon markets project is.
So there are, as you noted, Mark, all sorts of different types of projects. The most common types are projects which are conserving rainforests, which fall under the umbrella of REDD projects, REDD. And then there are also what we call carbon removals projects, which are efforts to take carbon that's already in the atmosphere and sequester it, normally in trees, but increasingly in the rocks as well, where it can stay more permanently.
Just connecting Ollie's point about quality with Alex's point about all the different aspects of sustainable development came together in New York. Because I think what's been missing in some of the carbon markets conversations for quite a long time is it's a tunnel vision on how many tons of carbon are associated with this project. But really the quality question is about what's the biodiversity impact of that reforestation project or conservation project? What's the impact on the indigenous land stewards of those forest resources? So I think what we're starting to see perhaps is the different aspects of sustainable development coming together in different ways. And the quality conversation is, a lot of it is not just about how much carbon is there, it's about what are these other either co-benefits or co-impacts.
I agree. I hope that Ollie does. And Ollie, we've both given you an interjection now to use in your answer or straighten out for us. But yeah, how do you respond to Matt's interjection there? And again, let you get on that track of how you followed carbon markets last week.
Well, surprise, surprise, I couldn't agree with you more, Matt. I think, for as long as there has been carbon markets, there's always been this tension between, is it just about carbon? Or is it also about the wider impacts of projects on society? And I think actually in New York last week, it was brought back a little bit towards being around co-benefits. Like so much of the integrity discussion has focused on permanence, additionality, like all of these really technical aspects about whether the carbon itself is of high quality. But actually, we know that the challenges we face are about a much broader set of things around the how, like how is the project being done, how have the communities been engaged, is it going to be sustainable in the long term, like all of those things which are really important. And actually that's a good segue into what I was going to say about supply. So for the last couple of years, laser focus on quality, and last week some research was published which just looked at projects in the carbon market, and they looked at the existing pool of projects where overall you find that quality is questionable. There's a really broad spectrum, but the kind of middle quality is not particularly high and not where you'd want it to be. What they also did was looked at 500 new projects that are just in the early stages of registering to issue carbon credits. And what they found is that the quality of that pool of new projects is much higher. So what that shows is that with that focus on quality, there's been an overall reaction on the supply side of the market to be higher quality, which I think is really good news.
Yeah, no, great answer and great build in there, Matt. I'm struck as I move on that permanence and the co-benefits, of course, live together, right? The permanence, if folks are listening and they don't know this well, again, it means that if it's a tree planting project, that the trees are still there in 25 and 50 and 100 years. And the likelihood of that happening is so much higher if the co-benefits for the community that lives near and takes care of the forest are good benefits. So it feels like maybe a nice move forward in terms of the way the carbon markets conversation played out this year in New York. But either way, if we dig specifically in on the social impact and human rights part of the conversation, what happened last week?
Yes, Mark, I think there was a very clear focus on just transition. And it's been amazing to see how only folks like the ILO was starting to talk about this a few years ago. And now a broader set of stakeholders have embraced the conversation of just transition and actually asking, what does it mean? And who has what role and what responsibility in just transition? But I think it's already obvious for people why we need to put people at the center of our climate discussions and decisions. One is that if we don't have social acceptance, we won't be able to build all of the new energy infrastructure that we need at the pace that we need. So if you think how many more copper mines we need, how many more miles of transmission lines we need, et cetera, this is going to touch millions and millions of people. Imagine if they didn't feel respected by new projects, or they didn't see the benefits, then that's not happening. There was a person in one of the sessions that I attended in the Renewables Summit that also linked it in a very clear way to politics, which was a good basic reminder. People elect politicians. People who are unhappy with our climate strategies then will elect politicians who will not support climate action going forward. Very simple. So the discussions, I think, really increase that awareness of putting people at the center. And then we need to be very practical about it. What does it mean for companies when companies are thinking about changing their supply chain, when companies are thinking about changing their contracts for energy, phasing out projects, etc.? I felt that conversation happening way more than compared to years past.
Yeah, incredibly heartening, I think. And doing one small thing, just checking all of us on acronyms, folks will probably realize the ILO, as referred to as the International Labor Organization, just in case. And then on the infrastructure piece and making sure people are at the center, Alex, I probably do this at my peril, but I think I'm right that we need to build 80 million kilometers, 50 million miles of new transmission line in the next couple decades to transmit all of the wonderful new green and renewable energy we're going to bring online. Because of course, those projects tend to be in places that are not where the people who need the electricity are. And the risk is it's the biggest ever not in my backyard palooza that we've ever seen, where everybody wants to be on the receiving end of the green energy, but does not want that transmission line to go anywhere near their community, their home, through the forest nearby them. All rational in their way, but somehow we've got to move that stuff around. So if you saw and felt the conversation moving to put people at the center, I don't just think that's nice. I think it is beyond necessary. We will not make progress unless we have people at the center.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, Mark. That back to a point that Alex was making earlier, it's almost like this was not the first perhaps, but a very interconnected sustainable development conference and a whole series of conversations where people are starting to see that, oh, this connects to that. and this creates that, and I'm dependent on this. And the big theme that we're seeing in nature, I think, is this word dependency that the TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, introduced into the conversation. Companies have thought about impact. What's my company impact on the environment? That's been the big theme for years and years and years. The big shift is, how is your business dependent on the natural world for its access to land, its access to water, its access to agricultural materials, its access to people and labor? So that idea of we're interconnected, our businesses are interconnected and dependent has been a big one that I heard, that I'm seeing people start to really grapple with and start to understand. The other big theme that I was going to throw in as well, because I think it's really relevant to what we just talked about, is technology was a big theme that I picked up on in the nature space. And so we've been doing a bunch of things that I'm now thinking of have been quite small in the nature tech space. We're building a thing we call the Nature Tech Alliance with Salesforce, Planet Labs, who are the satellite imagery people, a company called Nature Metrics that does kind of the on-the-ground eDNA, environmental DNA work. We're starting to see a lot of companies start to really recognize the power of new technologies, including AI, for solving some of these challenges. I had some fascinating conversations with some incredibly smart and enthusiastic, 25, 30-year-olds who are harnessing these technologies to create entirely different insights and put them in the hands of decision makers. Some fascinating stuff that's starting to come through.
So one of the main themes of the UN General Assembly was a global digital compact, right? And we've all seen the conversation about artificial intelligence growing. Well, the more we need that tech capability, the more energy we will need for that tech capability, by the way. So I also saw very strongly how tech and energy saw their interdependencies, if you want, in a clearer way today, not just the solutions, but also the challenges that creates, which is very interesting. Again, the interconnections.
To think of your world of social and people, I was starting to talk to people about EdgeAI, and I could try and explain it, but I don't know how to, Mark. It's basically using lower power AI models out in the community rather than bring it all back to the center, but using different sorts of technologies to empower people on the very front lines, because we all now have these devices in our pockets called cell phones, and many people in the world have cell phones, as ways to both bring data back to the middle, to a corporation or a financier or a carbon developer, but also to start to put information in the hands of people who are living out in the world, managing these forests that Oliver's going to invest in, even incentivizing, passing money across through transactions that are now enabled in very different ways, which takes nothing away from your point, Alex, about the massive energy needs, but it starts to bring more people into the conversation and to empower them in different ways, rather than perhaps our one-way travel that we've had before.
So Matt mentioned TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which that followed the TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and now there is a TISFD. What is it, and why was it something that I heard on many people's lips last week?
Yes, of course. So that would be the Task Force on Inequalities and Social-Related Financial Disclosures. Very interesting. The process launched last week, and they're aiming to come up with a framework similar to TCFD and TNFD in 2 years' time. So the same, let's say, architecture that clarifies companies' governance, strategy, formulation of metrics, et cetera, within the social space, focusing on human rights, well-being, living wages, for example. Yeah, so quite interesting. In the social space, I like to simplify the social space for folks because it seems a little bit messy. But basically, it's about avoiding harm to people and maximizing benefits for people, right? That's what the social space is about. So TISFD will bring those two aspects of social together and speak the same language that now companies are used to speaking with these other frameworks so that they have clear pathways forward.
And Alex, I love the simplicity of avoiding harms and maximizing benefits. If I'm honest, well, I heard excitement about TIFSD last week. I also heard concern, kind of particularly about the pace. You know, TCFD and TNFD were both developed in more than 2 years each. And it might be argued that they have simpler metrics because more of them are more easily quantified. So do you share any of that concern about how fast TIFSD is going to roll out?
Well, I have to confess that I was a little bit surprised that they gave themselves or are setting for themselves a 2-year time frame. I think that's ambitious. On the other hand, the rationale for that is understanding that audiences are impatient. Companies are going through very large, let's say, heavy transformations of their business models and their sustainability agendas. And if there are ongoing moving pieces, then we'll just lose their attention if you want. So I think it's ambitious, but hey, if they take another year, that's good. I thought they were going to set a timeline for 4 or 5 years, but there you go.
Okay, we'll have to watch that space, and I'm excited to see it delivered. And I think it will prove really, really quite difficult in practice. Not that it's not a difficulty worth pursuing, but just genuinely hard, because it is. Climate Week New York is one of 3 big sustainability events that take place in this latter portion of the calendar year. We happen to be in a year where the biannual Nature COP process lands. So the last time was COP15 Montreal in 2022. This year, the Nature COP is going to take place in Cali, Colombia. And it's coming up in just a few weeks, actually. We'll follow that with COP29 on climate in Baku. Matt, given your role at ERM, you won't at all be surprised, I don't think, to have me turn to you to say what's going to happen in Cali and what threads are going to have pulled through from New York.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one. I mean, you and I were both in Montreal, Mark, and one of the things that we all noticed was there was something like 1,000, 1,200 corporate representatives there. The previous version of the biodiversity COP had something like 40, apparently. So like 2 orders of magnitude difference. I was talking to the head of nature from WBCSD while I was in New York, and he said he knows at least 750 WBCSD member representatives that are going to be in Cali. So I don't know what that means, but it's going to be, I'm confident we'll say it's more than Montreal. So one of the main things I think is a continued upswing in corporate interest in the nature agenda. I think that's one of the first things. I think the second thing, probably from a policy perspective, I'm not expecting any giant changes in the policy agenda. I mean, we had the revised global biodiversity framework in Montreal. We will see countries start to report out or talk about their national stock takes and where do they stand on those things. So that will be a step ahead. I think the third thing, to steal one of Ollie's rhetorical devices, is going to be some of the pull through around youth and around the whole of society coming together. And so I think that kind of theme that Alex was talking about from New York is going to be, it's part of the agenda for Cali. So we'll see that coming through strongly. And then the fourth thing probably is, one of the great things about it being in Colombia is that Colombia is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. Yeah. And so that's going to be a massive motivating force through the whole thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think the connection between COP16 Cali this year and COP30 on climate in Belém, Brazil next year, you know, the location of these events, the biodiversity richness of these places, of course, with Brazil, the connection back to the original Earth Summit and Rio plus 20, these things matter. Words matter, location matters. These things all also connect. A lot of people were saying what some of you were commenting on, that, New York Climate Week this year may significantly overshadow the COP. Accessibility numbers, maybe Baku a little bit lost between a big event in Dubai last year and Brazil next year, but I think we might underestimate it at our peril as well. So similar to the question to Matt about the Nature COP, what threads do you see pulling through from here to Baku in a couple of months? And maybe Ollie, you can go first.
So the name of the game for my area regarding COPs is Article 6, which is the article of the Paris Agreement, which talks about carbon markets. Anyone who's been observing the COPs over the last year will know that it's been an area of slow progress and contention between the countries. I think what you really saw at New York Climate Week, and there is a change actually in flavor, is that the governments, and particularly the US government, are now being very encouraging around the voluntary carbon market. And whether that translates into them kind of playing a wider role at COP, I think remains to be seen. But New York Climate Week, for example, you've seen the ICVCM, for another acronym, which is the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, and have been setting out the core carbon principles, which will set the kind of integrity threshold for supply. What you saw in New York was a US government department, the Commodity Futures and Trading Commission, recognizing in their policy guidance the core carbon principles as a kind of standard framework. So what you're seeing is this convergence between all of the good work that's going on the voluntary side to prop up quality, and governments saying, hey, we could actually use this in our international and national frameworks and policy. So I think that's a really interesting confluence and an area to watch.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And I heard another colleague, not ERM, but somebody I've worked with in the past and at a client company, talking last week about how with Article 6, if we get this locked down, the major articles of the Paris Agreement are all locked down. That, again, it kind of ties nicely to the it's time. We're done the talking. We've mapped it out. Let's go, folks. And Baku, that's maybe one of its opportunities, is it has the opportunity to be the first COP following the negotiation of the key articles from Paris, which is at least interesting. Alex, for you, looking ahead, maybe on the social side of things towards Baku.
One theme that I noticed in New York and will pull to Baku is public-private coordination, right? So now targets have been set. We all need to get things done. In order to get things done, we need to get specific about which policy, which program, which financing, which process, et cetera. And that requires coordination between governments, companies, and others. I saw this theme coming up quite a bit. I had a chance to speak to the high-level champion for COP29, and they said that even from logistics to panels, et cetera, they were going to provide more space for these more concrete coordination conversations to happen between companies and governments. So that's one. The other one is financing. This is the financing COP, right? Again, if we're going to get things done, somebody has to pay for things. And of course, there's going to be a list of things, how much for new energy solutions, how much for climate adaptation and community resilience, those affected by extreme weather patterns, et cetera. How much gets invested in the north, how much gets invested in the south, blended finance, how to pull resources from international organizations, investors, companies, et cetera. So I think that these two themes, public-private coordination and financing, will be at the heart of conversations in Baku.
Yeah, I think both great points, Alex. And I think that not only will those topics be central in Baku, they will continue well beyond. And that figuring out who and how pays, we still have a lot of work to do. We're better at tallying up what the cost is going to be than finding actual hard money to put against it. Although it's getting better, right? We're seeing better cases and more value perceived in making those kinds of investments. I want to thank all three of you. It's been such a pleasure. It was great to see you and to get a chance to work together last week in New York. excellent also to do this debrief together. For all of you listening, all the Sustainable Connections podcasts are available on erm.com. If you ever have any feedback for us on the programs, we would love to hear it. Going out today, just so many thanks, Alex, Matt, and Ollie. Hope the rest of your post-Climate Week recovery treats you well and you put everything you learned to great use, doing the work that needs to be done to move this sustainability agenda forward. Thank you. Bye for now.